run by and see the Patrick Hospital. So Ashley, you have an announcement? Ashley told me that she can sing in front of people, but she doesn't like to talk in front of people.
I just wanted to say Alex is helping kind of get together a young adult class for us, ranging from college-age students up to young families. Please join us in the chapel. We are in an area where if kids want to join us or something else to play with. Starts at 10.
10 o'clock in the chapel for young adults and families. Also, we have some connection cards. If you want to be filling those out, we'll pick them up in the collection plate. And if there are any visitors here today, we're not going to call you out and make you feel like I did John, feel the spot or anything. But we would like to make sure that you're recognized. There's going to be there's a little folks out front in the narthex, and they have a gift for you if you'd like to take that. And after service, we have coffee fellowship down in the, what was it, brunch center? You know how to read those emails. So we have a brunch today downstairs in the fellowship hall. Are there any other announcements? Okay, after Lucy sits down, we'll pray. Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this glorious day that you've given to us and all the gifts that you've given to us. And on this joyous Easter, we particularly celebrate the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, and our salvation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you would now greet each other.
Well, I wondered if anybody was going to say happy Easter. Have you already been Easter egg done? Yeah. Okay. How many of you have already been into your families? Oh, I did. Well, I know that those of you who are at school have recently been doing some tests. And the state just insists we take these tests. So I thought we ought to give you a test at church too. Okay? What I'm going to do this morning is give you a test to see what your knowledge is about holidays. What holiday do you think that is? What? You had it. Well, that can be one, but maybe what? No. Independence Day, 4th of July, of course. That's when the flag becomes very important to us, okay? All right. Now, I'm sure somebody will get this with you. Thanksgiving, and what do we do at Thanksgiving besides eat? Give thanks. All right, super. That's great. Christmas. And why do we celebrate Christmas? Okay. Jesus' birthday. All right. Pretty good. Well, let's go one more. Let's go one more. You knew that one? Easter. Easter. Why are eggs important at Easter? Why? The Easter Bunny. Why are eggs important? Easter egg hunts? Yep, they did that. Okay. Okay. What can you do with an egg? What? You can dye it. What? I don't think I'm getting candy in that one. There you go. Yeah. What happens if you were to leave that egg alone and leave it with the hen who laid it? What? Okay, somebody else did what? Okay. It would hatch into a chick. Isn't that interesting that there's a chicken in that egg? Isn't that a miracle? How do you know? Are you sure? Well, the egg becomes a symbol of Easter because the chick comes out of the egg just like Jesus came out of the tomb on that resurrection day. And that's important. And so people began to give eggs to children as a symbol of new life in Jesus. So, the Easter eggs are fun. And I hope that every time you see an Easter egg, it'll help you remember that Jesus is alive. And because he is alive, you and I can have eternal life as well. Let's pray together. Jesus, we're so grateful that you were resurrected from the grave and that you live among us, that you are our Lord and our Savior, that you walk with us and guide us and help us to do the things that are right. We're grateful for all that you do for us, but most especially for your love and your presence in our lives. Bless each one of these children here this day in the homes in which they come, that they might grow closer to you. In your name we pray. Super good. You have a happy Easter. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
And we are alive because He lives. We invite you to stand as we join in singing together.
As we go to the Lord in prayer, we kind of developed a tradition here of giving you an opportunity to share in that prayer. So I hope you'll do that as we begin to pray this day. You might share names of persons that you're concerned with, that you'd like us to lift in prayer, situations, need prayer for, whatever the need may be. We'll give you the opportunity and share in our prayers. So let us pray. What a glorious day you've given us, and we revel in the fact that we're able to be here in this place of worship this day, to greet one another with a hallelujah, he is risen, for he has risen indeed. That's the basis of our faith, that's the basis of our life, and we're grateful for that resurrection. For he put his stamp of approval on all that is right, good, and pleasurable in your sight. And we pray that we might so live, that we might bring joy to you and to the kingdom as we reach out to others. But we also would lift this day the concerns of persons who are on our hearts, family members, friends, neighbors, situations within the world that concern us, and where we need to bring the power of good, the power of your presence, the power even of miracles there. So we lift before you these prayers this day.
My sister Margaret.
Bill Terms.
Tammy Brooks, Judy Moss.
Charlie Cross.
Glenn's family.
Don James. Bianca family. Timothy A. Watt.
My brother-in-law, Wayne DeLand.
Eric and Sandy.
The Booth family and student body at DeLand High.
All the teenagers and their choices they must make.
The United Methodist Church in DeLand, in Florida, in America, and around the world.
Father, we know you've heard these requests. You know even the ones that we do not speak about. You know our thoughts, even before we know. So we pray that you might minister to those in their special needs, whether it's for healing and wholeness, or hope, or courage in the midst of tragic death, or for guidance in the way in which one should walk. Whatever the need, pursue the blessing of each one, and draw them closer to you. Grant these things, we pray in the name of him who taught us when we pray and say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and power, and glory forever. Amen.
praise you. We offer these offerings to you and ask that you glorify them, that we use them to glorify you, that you multiply them so we may spread your word throughout this world. In Jesus' name. Our scripture lesson today is from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12. And if you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, it's on page 85 in the New Testament. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared. They found the stone pulled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground. And the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words, and returning to the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Isn't it nice to have a glorious Easter Sunday morning? Sure beats what happened Friday. Friday was a good indication of what Friday might have been like several centuries ago. Can you imagine seeing a gospel film that exposes you for the very first time to the crucifixion of Jesus, and watching that whole crucifixion scene unfolding there on Golgotha? And then later in that same film, witnessing Jesus' resurrection. Surprise! Pastor was driving by a cemetery with his 5-year-old son in the car. There was a newly dug grave, a pile of dirt there. And the boy said, "Dad, look, one got out." His dad says, whenever I pass the cemetery, I think about the one who got out. Tony Campbell tells about a sermon that he heard his African-American pastor deliver on Good Friday. The pastor began the message very quietly by saying, "It's Friday, and my Jesus is hanging dead on a tree. But it's Friday, and Sunday's coming." When the deacon shouted, "Preach it, brother, preach!" So the pastor got a little louder. It's Friday. Mary's crying her eyes out, and the disciples are scattered like sheep without a shepherd. But it's Friday, and Sunday's coming. And he began to work that phrase over and over again. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And finally he shouted, "It's Friday!" And the whole congregation jumped to its feet and shouted back, "But Sunday's coming!" Well, it's my privilege to stand before you this Easter 2019 and declare with absolute certainty, Sunday is here.
Amen.
Easter Sunday is here. Our greatest fears have proven groundless, and our greatest hopes have been realized. Death has been defeated. Hate has done its worst, and love has triumphed. Sunday is here, and Jesus Christ is risen from the grave. You all know the story of the first Easter. The only problem is if you read it in the various Gospels, the accounts are different. But that's what happens when you depend upon the eyewitness testimony of people. No one thought to get their cell phone out and record the thing for posterity. But let's look at that resurrection through the eyes of the women on that who were involved. Well, on that first day of the week, they discovered the tomb was empty. Imagine their surprise when they discovered Jesus got out. Now, why were the women coming to the tomb on Sunday morning? Well, if you'll recall, he was crucified on Friday. He was taken from the cross just as the sun was beginning to set, and the Sabbath was starting. You see, the Sabbath goes from Friday sunrise or sunset to Saturday sunset. These women were very religious women. They could not do work on the Sabbath. And they knew it was going to take time to wash the body and anoint it and prepare it for burial. And that task couldn't be done that Friday evening. And so these devout Jewish women were there to prepare their friend's body for burial. They came back that Sunday morning to complete that task. I want you to hear one more time those words from Luke's Gospel. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus Christ. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. And in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee? The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. And when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them, who told this to the apostles, but they did not believe. They didn't believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. What had happened? These women had just witnessed the most important moment in human history. And it was too good to keep to themselves, so they hustled back to Jerusalem to share with the disciples the good news. Surprise! He's alive! One sign that these stories are authentic is the honest reaction of the people who heard them. It's always been interesting to me that not one of the remaining 11 disciples who had walked for 3 years with Jesus believed that he could be risen from the grave. Not one. But later they would recall on many occasions that Jesus had said to them things like, "I am the resurrection and the life." But when he was actually resurrected, they were as shocked as anything. You know, people rising from the dead were not part of their reality, just like it's not part of our reality, unless you're into watching Game of Thrones. We like to believe that the dead live on, that the grave is not the end. But until someone rose from the dead, it was not something we could count on. On that Sunday long ago, a man emerged from a tomb. And now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, death has been defeated. Friday is over. Sunday is here. Surprise! He's alive. Jesus' resurrection marks the moment when life overcame death. And that's the reason that most of us are here today. Because death has been overcome. In 1975, I was diagnosed with malignant melanoma after a mole was removed from my chest wall. And the surgeon informed me that I was going to have some more extensive surgery. I underwent that surgery and was assured by the surgeon that the margins were clean. I was in good shape. But in 1976, it was back with a vengeance. This time in the lymph system. Major surgery was scheduled, and I was told to go home and get my affairs in order. And for the first time it hit me, I could die from cancer. I was a young pastor with a wife, 2 young daughters. I spent a week in the woods prior to my scheduled surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital in December. While I was there, I came to the realization that I was going to die. Eventually. Either from cancer or from something else. But I was definitely going to die. It was not a question of if I was going to die, it was a question of how I was going to die. And when. And so my prayer became, let me live to raise my girls and to be a good shepherd to my flock. And if that's not possible, then let me show them how to die as one who is filled with hope. When the professional golfer Paul Azinger was diagnosed with cancer and was struggling with that diagnosis, his friend Larry Moody said to him, Zinger, we are not in the land of the living going to the land of the dying. We are in the land of the dying going to the land of the living. That's what Easter's all about. Listen once again to the angel's words. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. We are not in the land of the living going to the land of the dying. Easter reminds us we're in the land of the dying going to the land of the living. Paul Azinger went on to write about from his perspective, how that changed his life as he underwent cancer treatments and returned to the PGA Tour. He wrote, the only way you will find contentment is in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm not saying anything that bothers, I'm not saying nothing bothers me. I don't have problems, but I feel like I've found the answer to the 6-foot hole. I know where I'll spend eternity. I'll spend it with God. And I have a promise that as a child of God, He'll help me be within Him. He promises to offer me contentment regardless of what life brings, even cancer. And to that I can say a hearty amen. The resurrection marks the moment when life overcame death. The resurrection also marks the moment when hope overcame grief. Fridays, let's face it, are still a very real part of our life and living. Imagine how the women felt on that Friday as they stood at the foot of the cross. There stood Mary, the mother of Jesus, watching as her son's blood dripped into the dust beneath that cross. Surely she must have recalled his birth. The songs of the angels, the visit of the shepherds and the wise men. Surely the words that old Simeon spoke to her in the temple that day when they took Jesus for presentation echoed in her mind again. Remember, he said, this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and the sword will pierce your soul also. Now she understood his words, and her heart ached. Mary Magdalene and the other two women who had such love for Jesus stood with his mother and listened to the jeers and mockery of the crowd. They'd been there when the crowd clamored for Barabbas, the criminal, to be released, and demanded that Jesus be crucified. Now, here he was, stretched out on a cross, with nails driven through his hands and his feet. Soldiers mocked him. The soldiers spat on him. They pierced him. They left him exposed to the elements so that he could die of thirst and pain. Oh, the Bible is very upfront about acknowledging Fridays, because Fridays are part of this living in this world. Maybe you held a child in your arms as it's taken its last breath. Or you may have been by the bedside of a loved one who's racked with pain from the debilitating disease of cancer, and you have prayed for God to be merciful. Take them. Or you've asked some honest and hard questions of God, and God is not offended by our questions. In fact, I think God invites them. Because you see, Fridays are part of life's fabric. It's how we grow in our relationship with God. British author Malcolm Muggeridge made this profound statement in the letter that he wrote to Bill Buckner. As an old man, Bill, looking back on one's life, it's one of the things that strikes you most forcibly, that the only thing that's taught one anything is suffering. Not success, not happiness, not anything like that. The only thing that really teaches one what life's about, the joy of understanding, the joy of coming in contact with what life really signifies, is suffering and affliction. You see, Muggeridge was talking about Fridays, and the Bible is very forthright in acknowledging life's Fridays. But the Bible is equally clear that Friday is not God's last word. Sunday is coming. Easter Sunday. Sunday is God's ultimate answer to life's most profound questions. Death and darkness have been defeated. Christ is risen from the grave. That first Easter, Mary Magdalene and Peter were confused. They could not figure out where his body was. It certainly was not involved in a robbery because the grave clothes were still there. And had somebody stolen the body, they would have taken grave clothes and all. After seeing these things, Peter turned and walked away, kind of scratching his head, wondering what had happened. My goodness. Friends, the resurrection demands a far greater response than that, because the resurrection is a decisive moment in human history. Jesus, who claimed to be the living embodiment of the one true God, died, and in 3 days he was raised from the dead. He came back to life. There is no other belief system on earth that teaches that about its founder, or its prophet, or its God. If the resurrection is a lie, then you had no reason to get up this morning and come here. If the resurrection is a lie, then millions of Christian churches around the world might as well close their doors for good. If the resurrection is a lie, then all of the hospitals and orphanages and homeless shelters that have been built in Jesus' name should shut their doors. What do they have to offer? But it is not a lie. In fact, it's the most important truth known to humanity. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? In the classic novel, The Road, the character Marcellus has become fascinated with Jesus. He writes to his fiancée, Diana, telling her about Jesus' teachings and miracles, about his crucifixion and resurrection. And finally, he informs her that he has decided to become a disciple of Jesus. In her letter of response, Diana says, "What I feared was that it might affect you." It's a beautiful story. Let it remain so. We don't have to do anything about it, do we? Well, the answer to that question is yes, we do. We have to decide, is the resurrection a truth or a lie? If it's a truth, it marks the most important moment in human history. And it calls us to a very special kind of life here and now, a life of following Jesus. You see, we're fortunate. We live on the other side of the resurrection. We have the privilege of knowing that Jesus is with us and that neither life nor death can separate us from his love. So how is that being lived out in your life? So many people today are filled with hopelessness and despair. So many are filled with anger and fear. Are we really an Easter people? Have we not gotten the word that though there will always be Fridays until the Lord comes, Sunday's coming? God loves us so much He will not leave us in grief or in the grave. And that knowledge has given Jesus' followers power over their circumstances for more than 2,000 years. Bill and Gloria Gaither have been going through some very difficult times. Gloria was pregnant. Bill had been quite ill. And their music had been just ripped by some of the reviewers in the gospel music industry. On New Year's Eve, Gloria said she sat in a dark room trying to deal with her fears when something indescribable happened. She said, "I can't quite explain what happened in that next moment, but suddenly I felt released from it all. The panic that had begun to build inside me was gently dispelled by a reassuring presence and a soft voice saying, 'Don't forget the empty tomb. Don't forget the empty tomb.'" And in that moment, she said, "I knew I could have this baby and face the future with optimism and trust, for I had been reminded that it was all worth it just because he lives." And so she wrote these words, "How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives, but greater still the calm assurance that child can face uncertain days because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear we're here today to reaffirm our faith in the resurrection. We need to be reminded of the power of life over death, of hope over despair, of love over hate. And we can only do that by looking into the empty tomb of the man from Galilee. Today is not a denial of life's suffering and sorrow. Even Jesus, the Son of God, had his Friday. When you're going through a difficult and sorrowful time, remember, it's only Friday. And Friday is not God's final word. Sunday is God's final word. Easter Sunday is God's final word. For Jesus Christ is risen from the grave. Leave here this day and tell everyone that Jesus is alive. Hallelujah. Amen.
Let's stand as we sing our closing chorus in the bulletin, Because He Lives.
We rejoice that He lives. And pray that you will send us forth now with power to share the good news with the world that's not sure